Chom den den jambe yong la sha zo lo kange lo de dem nyen den dara nye dara nam da rab sara ve nye den gun chi yin zi chire nye je tu gara le bam zen kanda si be chun re ma re mun tum dung re che ze ve Drosoy kola puje tarze yin la yu chu yung den song Drodare che dro nyamon yilong le je chak dro ndron zewe jen Mare mun sere dungen nyugu jinye chun ze ra je nam Dene tajin sa chu tar sun yun den lu zo Yase tuwe ko Chödrak chödan chönye gente Dalwe müzen jambe yong la de Zedinen cheje chenra vözre che Dalwe demo membarab srane Kadan denje jonglo tokpa ye Lo zhe po be non wa zao du solo Nam da zu chim ser je sa je den Den zen pa me re ling ge ben ze Sherab nye de non we che kum sara Tum shon zho we la ma sha ge yu Yamya shana doje jin re se sa ye nimbo deva nam praser nam ge nimbo shamba ikun do san ye we se jin je la ngue sha sa lo rikam sa ben men ro dam be se rem ni lam je lo bro te ma jong de shin gu je de bu ter ze be yang zen la ma je para je la du la so tene Samba Shongjup Chodu Tuje Parambache Dan Chosum La Tabsum Drowa Te Teni Jesu Chembe Gone Tambe Chu Senro Nang.
So please begin by taking refuge in the three jewels and to generate the Bodhi mind, and with that as your basis, please listen attentively and take to heart the explanations that are to be given.
Tene te yinde tang zo kazang donchang ne meg teaching kaptala ne jamru kor dos shubi tene ngazo jamsun rowa sengende jertan jamron den deva samma yimpa chosum bi yuen den te da do yesu den nang tu ba chi go ge yote de shong ba yina dene ngaran nam san je ba cha ge yote.
During the previous weekend course, Khenpo Rinpoche explained about the practice of taking refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Noble Sangha. Now, the practice isn't a case of simply reciting the refuge prayer. It is about reciting the refuge prayer, but not as a mere lip service, but on the basis of recollecting the good qualities of the three jewels as one takes refuge in them. Their qualities being the reason for why one takes refuge in them. So, if the practice of refuge is done in this way, then it's truly a Buddhist practice. a simple recitation does not qualify as proper practice, as it were.
Tache Tandakama Sambelin Re, Mama Kakaes Re, Tabuka Yuni Re, Lubos Re Casa, Kale, Nekunchosum, Yes Tembendo de Yang Shede Vijin, the Indu Chenamba Kunchosum Guyendente, Jesu Tin etup. Te Tanda Doza Tin Tukumindu, Nando de Yan and Yang to Lone. Tene Sam Kongronang.
Now, during many years, in terms of karma sampling, here in the city of Vienna, previously at another center with the name the Karma Kagyu Sangha, and also in Dakpo Kagyiling in France, and the monastery associated with Dakpo Kagyiling, the Kundroling monastery, and in other places, Khenpo Rinpoche has taught the sutra which sets forth the recollecting of the good qualities of the three jewels many times. So he tells all of you, or he rather advises all of you to try to recollect the qualities that have been explained to you in the context of you having attended one or more of those courses. Now, if this point in time, for some people, it's difficult to recollect those qualities because for various reasons, as it were. Not having kept the qualities or the recollecting of them in mind, that would make for forgetting what was taught. Now, if that has occurred, then please go back either to a transcript of the course you attended that you may have, or try to remember what Khenpo Rinpoche taught during these courses regarding this practice of recollecting the good qualities of the three jewels as part and parcel of taking refuge in the three jewels. Something that a true Buddhist practitioner would do on a daily basis.
Tonju Shimbochi Tongnaendra, Dolo Yakochi Kanaendra, Dolo Rao Savachi Tomnanda, Toma Nido, Semgenanda, Gunchosum Che, Samsum Ge, Gunchosum the Chepaya Pu, Gunchosum Ge, Yendente, Lenji Yes Chambananda. Tene, dear Kamro, the assembly.
The following is a Buddhist practice in terms of, or is one of the methods in terms of the Buddhist practice of recollecting the good qualities of the three jewels frequently. Whether one eats a delicious meal accompanied by tasty drinks, or if one has even been given or purchased a set of new clothing and the like, the first thing one does as a true Buddhist practitioner is to, in one's mind, offer the delicious meal with the tasty drinks that go with the meal, or the new set of clothing to the three jewels in honor of their good qualities, by way of which we are able to make some progress on the path to enlightenment, by reminding ourselves about the fact that, the fact that the three jewels have qualities by means of which they can show the path. So whatever that one appreciates when having that something, the first thing as a Buddhist practitioner that should come or surface in one's mind should and would be, in terms of a proper Buddhist practitioner, to make an offering of that to the three jewels in honor of their qualities.
rangi misendi nang la kale che tebe yina kale tebe tula yang kuncho som biyuen den yes tene kuncho sum je tu je de sept wa sho samsum da den daga na shinge nasa ta khadai jigin jitra khar chona yang kuncho som de ma je wa chi thana tsin Melam dupoche mene jita che di yung kuncho sam train to ba shongwa yina ten ngone nge lo de japsun rogi yute.
Now the point of doing this is to make the recollecting of those qualities part of how one thinks, how one acts and so on, because if this practice is well established, as it were, in the mind of someone, it means that the mind quite naturally takes this focus in the circumstances of appreciating something or in circumstances of distress and suffering, knowing that when supplicating the three jewels, one's distress, suffering and the like can in this way be appeased, because the three jewels have the qualities by way of which this is possible. So when, for example, in distress, when struck down by a serious illness, having had a nightmare while sleeping, all these situations of distress, when those situations happen, if it's happening, or if any of those situations is happening to a practitioner who has this habit of recollecting the good qualities of the three jewels, and then supplicating the three jewels, asking for guidance and so on, that will happen quite naturally in the case of this kind of practitioner who is in the habit of doing this, of recollecting the qualities of the three jewels.
나 따뜻하게 로지여나 직도 동을 가르쳐나야 건축 두제 좁그래 맞고 매저바 말에 대 리페고는 dum나야 덥투그래 롱거고는 dum나야 덥투그래.
So protection, as it were, from situations of distress and the like will happen when this is the case. And this is something that can be made clear by way of both reasoning and by way of quoting words of the Buddha and many Buddhist masters of old in this regard.
대체투 따뜻하게 잡순 조베 로데 낭바상제베게 냠니 여도 쪽에
kanske chapsu drove låte
대 낭바상제바게 냠니 요새기 이해가 싸워들이.
So this kind of practice, to take refuge in the ways just described, is the basis for all other Buddhist practices. So this is the foundation of the Buddhist path, as it were.
대체 용대 단 넘버상에 베게 람비 냠는데 되니 제브섬게 람비 냠는 나라 도투기.
Now, in terms of the Buddhist path, you have various parts of it, and here you find a number of categorizations. There is one very well-known categorization in terms of how many parts of the Buddhist path there are, which sets forth three paths, or three parts of the path, as it were. The first is the segment of the path concerned with the practices of the practitioner who is on the lower level. So that includes the beginning of the path and a portion of it, followed by the next part or segment of this path concerned with practices or how a person of a middling capacity goes about practicing the Buddhist path. And then you have the third part or segment, which is concerned with how a practitioner with a higher capacity properly practices his path.
대체 용대 반나 제부 송아래 간저 지 롱도르제 내 가리임바 쇼좀 신킹김 단 미륜들라 레 버게나 제부 송도 레자는 부르샤 세게도 단다라고 가르고고 열었으나 레까지 레나 샤와 셰tum kinchla 니빠용 kinchla.
So it's a matter of three segments of the Buddhist path in the context of three levels of capacity in terms of the extent to which the individual is able to practice. Now, the Tibetan word translated as individual, is Khenpo. And it's a reference to an individual who has in this context, who has the capacity to begin with, in terms of his mindset, to distinguish between right and wrong simply. Someone who understands, therefore, what he needs to do in order to be able to practice his path properly, in this case, the Buddhist path, and what he needs to give up in order to make progress, in order to not contradict the principles of his path, in this case, the Buddhist path. Now, the Sanskrit word Purusha was translated as Khenpo in the Tibetan language. And the Sanskrit word Purusha is a reference to an individual with a capacity to accomplish something. So it's a reference to the fact that, at least as a human being, one is able to make changes, make progress and the like. One does have the capacity to do so. Whether that capacity is used properly or not, that's another question. The main point is that a human being has this capacity to make changes in terms of words, thoughts, and deeds. Whether for the better or for the worse is a completely different other issue. An individual is the kind of sentient being who has this capacity.
Di
kangala yore va.
Ya
puchegi da meta koran soki.
Tete nge shugro. Ta di da ke nupa te nganso mi tenjin la chasang yue de re. Penna dundu tenjin da uchile chajana shozam yue de re.
So, as a human being, one has this capacity. All human beings have that capacity. An animal, on the other hand, doesn't have that capacity to the same extent. To some extent, yes, but not to the extent that a human being is capable of enacting acts by way of which something is accomplished.
Tatin nupate jebu sumga lamji nyamne nang chu ti yongda sincho lo de ting ro de rang rang la ra le.
De nang pe lam de chin chi lo gi nyamlen che gi yo me rang la ra le ge ra. De sumare
de
sumare
mare
laso
jebu sumga lamji nyamne nang pe nang de chu ti ne tene nyamne sincho ma lo ba ji che na yang rang la ko yo. Te sincho lo di nangbe nang ma shu ne nangba ma je ne so
de chin chi lo de kawa drago ngendo de ngai
sincho lo de konsa rang rang de lo da
che sang de nge shu yin de ma re sung sung a rang nang pe nyam len che yin sam ne tene lam de la go tsukra va tene so ge nyam len te ka re gi yö me da ma song na rangla ralegere.
That
Shuvarava.
oh yeah.
Chinchi logi yöna ra mena ra chinchi lona de rangla ralegere. Di sungvarava.
Oh yeah.
Di re mare. Nge de ko yöda me nge tenti che ma so.
Tange se yue den de. Kana purusha sangete. Me kangal kogi yarwa.
La re.
Di nupate pejo zongsar tangda. Nisachir tang tangbo ngarang la raji lepse.
So in terms of the fact that all human beings have the capacity to enact acts by way of which they accomplish something, in general, whatever that something may be. Now, whether the goal for a given individual in terms of what he accomplishes is a goal, a good goal, or the opposite. The choice he makes is his and his alone. The individual makes the choice whether he is going to accomplish something good or the opposite.
Tegana shinge ta yakuji chegoten nangba sanje be gor shu kunchosum na chapsum ro dambada shune che drup yung tu yang nenten ke manana yang shinchulo rogse.
Now if we continue with the same context, with reference to entering the Buddhist path, because one wants to accomplish the goal of that path, the goal of enlightenment, for the good of all, for example. One starts out with these good intentions. And because one wants to practice this path that can result in enlightenment, one takes refuge in the three jewels, and with respect to doing so, there is a set of commitments. There is a code of ethics that one pledges to uphold. Now, in the course of practicing the Buddhist path, Tene?
Di kap na yang rangke nenten chimbi gone nyamne ji manona shincholos drogt.
If one isn't vigilant, as it were, with respect to one's own mindset, one's behaviour and so on, it is possible that one may take a turn for the worse. That is to say, one falsifies the Buddhist path, as it were. One doesn't ensure that one's understanding of this path and its practices is the right understanding of this path and its practices and so on. And therefore, one may come to sort of practice the path, but in ways which contradicts the path, without even realizing that.
Di yindu tandela lam ndo dik yonde tangpo jeb chungyu lamge samna tang de song.
Now, in terms of the 37 practices, the next verse sets forth the first of these three levels, the level of a practitioner of a lower capacity.
That the Kararesana Bessin is one. Shindu Zeke Nison Dungal Nam Dikpe Legend Devil Tibet song, Desher sola papjang digbele, Nayam mishi, Jase lari songare.
Oh, I see. Did Kasang de che song mare?
Jayamare, and then wrote to be Kazan Jamro the she, Tene, oh, Nachambo so the Royatang the Sheba, Telatang,
Lare.
but take it to Circus.
Dagye para.
Yeparva.
So
Yepa the Jamro Mare, already Yepa.
We've come to verse number 8. I seem to recall that we did go through this verse partly the other weekend, but probably I'm mistaken. Khenpo Rinpoche says no. So whatever. We will today start with verse number 8, which reads as follows. The Buddha said, "The result of evil deeds is the suffering of the lower realms so difficult to bear. Therefore, to not commit evil acts, even at the cost of your life, is the practice of a bodhisattva." This verse is then related to the first of the 3 segments of the Buddhist path in the categorization spoken of today, which divides the practitioner into 3 types. The practitioner of a lower capacity, the one of a middling capacity, and the one of a higher capacity.
This song you do that can take Tanda called the water of the way. Yin Yang Tank quarter of the Aranso gay, Nison Sumge, Dungal Kare, then Dodon Dingus on Song Shavel, some Yang Dang Jay. Then lockdown to
Nganso Samgores.
Some Gogio. Then lockdown to Aranso Mingar Tung Tuba, Tundro Dunga Casendo. Penna Dundro Tento, Cesar Tindo de Cassette Dungaldo.
Tennis spray chili.
Chata? Tene Ran, say young do, which is set to Mindoa. Tak till the Tartabjik tap Kayan Yegmindoa, Ching, round sun Mindoa. Tagan, I think.
Waterfall. That North Pole.
Oh, yeah, that's all.
Just a second, I think this pen is at the end. No. Oh, thanks. Thanks. Lasso.
Tegana Shinge, Tesan, Panda Yajan Rosa Watang, Company Chamberton or 16 under Hakugadoa, Shinkatan to kilometer, Zugadoa, Sayin Andra, Druyin Andra. Saul Yebek, Mutsonga, Satin the Yatan. Satin the Tents have Shugutala, Duri. Number na so much time can say go to that then put in the wrong, then to some year.
So here the author, Togme Zangpo, speaks of evil deeds resulting in the suffering of the lower realms. Very difficult to bear. And the fact that knowing this, one should do whatever one can in order to never act, or in order to never enact evil deeds, even at the cost of one's life. Now, there is the mention of the so-called 3 lower realms, and the different kinds of suffering one finds in those existences, described in great detail by Buddha Shakyamuni himself, as is recorded in a number of sutras, and as is described by many Buddhist masters of old, and written down in the commentaries to the sutras that these masters authored. One should find out about those details, one should study those scriptures in order to have an understanding of the kind of suffering that's experienced in the 3 lower existences. Now, in terms of these 3 lower existences, as human beings, our perceptions are limited to see for ourselves what happens in those existences, except for in the 3rd of the 3 lower existences, that of the animal kingdom. We can see for ourselves what happened to those reborn in this type of existence as an animal, whether just a tiny insect or a large animal. And if we think about the fact that humans have domesticated animals, they hunt animals in order to eat their flesh. There are so-called, which is very common today, meat farms, where the farmer doesn't engage in agricultural activities, as it were, or practices. The farm is about cattle, whether it's cows, sheep, whatever, raised to be slaughtered and their flesh sold. Now, when these animals are brought to a slaughterhouse, we all know the suffering they do experience in connection with being slaughtered. There is no secrets, or there are no secrets about this. Today it's well documented the extent to which these animals suffer. Now, in the situation, that is to say, at the slaughterhouse, the animal has no option in terms of a capacity to escape his own slaughter. He can't pronounce the word please, he can't plead with the people who work at the slaughterhouse, asking them to spare his life. He can't do anything. He's simply subjected to the slaughter. End of story. Then we have agricultural practices today, where you have very large farms, square kilometer after square kilometer, that at the beginning of each season, the earth is plowed by large machines and has the effect of turning over the earth, at which point worms and other insects living in the earth, as the earth is turned over, they no longer can remain in their home, as it were, which is down in the earth. The earth is turned over, and the world is sort of turned upside down, and they die in effect of this. Then the seeds of the harvest are sown. The harvest then ripens, and in the process of that, the farmer, in order to protect his future harvest, will spray pesticides square kilometer after square kilometer. At which point, I've never seen an estimate of how many insects are slaughtered in this manner by way of poisoning them. However, one would think it's at least on large farms in the hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions. And the pesticides have the effect on the insects. That's how they die, to paralyze their central nervous system. And depending on which type of insect that's affected, some die quickly. For some, it may take up to 3 or 4 days, where they either slowly suffocate to death or starve to death. So this is yet another example of how an animal does not have the capacity to protect his own life in any way whatsoever. In the context of a slaughterhouse, in the context of today's agricultural practices, and so on and so forth.
Perda zinanda. Tatalo di nirem gna nenye po yorwa zambuli. De po yonde misolo uda kasedo. Ho tatrim tongcha hindu ngaji hard break ina jre so re takwa ke jegdo.
Narangi kare reso?
Nge hard break ina jre so re se de ke jegdo. Ta tongcha yeshe so chi re ni zambuli ped urje degdo.
Yes.
Penna tunro kashe jil ne de po yongdo se de shewa le gas tong se chade 수치게 될 돈을 책임다 뢰이 삼도 나랑 소리 다도다베 로싱게 가세진.
Now think of the following with reference to just how selfish human beings are. Put this, what was just described in brief, in the context of today's pandemic, which affects human beings primarily. And every day, in every newspaper, it's been going on for almost a year now. There are reports of that in this and that country today, 4,000 people died. And the reporters say, people on the streets say, we're heartbroken at the loss of life. And so on and so forth. We're now very used to hearing this every day. And of course, yes, it is heartbreaking. However, do any of these people who on a daily basis are now concerned with the welfare and the protecting of human life given thought to, how heartbreaking it is for the animals at the slaughterhouse, or how heartbreaking it is for the hundreds of thousands of insects that on a large agricultural farm are, as it were, gassed to death when pesticides are sprayed upon them, and sometimes they do die a very painful death over days. I'm not quite sure I've ever heard of any report or any human being being heartbroken because the tomato I had on my breakfast sandwich was cultivated in a way that probably a couple of hundred of insects died being sprayed to death, so that I can have this tomato on my breakfast sandwich. So?
Now,
think of the following. In order to protect human life, just in Denmark, the possibility of human lives being lost in Denmark, it hadn't yet happened because of the coronavirus mutation on the mink farm, but medical experts saw a danger in that the mutation that happened via the minks could be the cause of that the vaccines that were being developed would be ineffective, and therefore loss of human life on a large scale would happen. That was a possibility. It hadn't happened, and it has not yet happened. But there was this possibility, and therefore 17 million minks were slaughtered, because perhaps human life could be lost otherwise. There was no reporting of being heartbroken there over the death of the 17 million minks. So Buddha Shakyamuni and Buddhist masters of old did understand this sort of thing, just described to you right now. They would have been completely heartbroken because of the slaughtering of, for example, the 17 million minks, just because it's possible that human lives will be lost otherwise. So just to be on the safe side, get rid of them. And that's why he, at one point, and this is recorded in the Buddhist scriptures, the Indian Buddhist master of old, Shivalha, said, "What am I to do with this demon, the greatest of demons?" What did he refer to? He referred to the notion of a self, which makes for this type of horribly selfish behavior, namely to have no regard for the lives of 17 million minks, just because there is a possibility that otherwise there will be loss of life as to the human race.
Tiyinde tapena nyarwa da yeda dunge shuma go che tunro chipu la yang dunge tendra wa chi yong do te tunro le dam mangbo gi yeda dunge che gre dam mangbo gi tunru dungal de yeda dunga ni yeda dungal che gro wa.
Yeah, then you have
the
other two of the three lower realms, the one below on the list, as it were, is the land of pretas, where suffering is far greater than in the animal kingdom, and the one below that is a number of different so-called hellish existences, where suffering is even greater.
Into Tapan Semji Jin the Samna Matangache. Nara the Samatane, not into Gilu Limpesa.
So here in terms of the text, the author said that it is so-called evil deeds that cause rebirth in those realms. And therefore one should give up deeds of this kind. And so in order to really get the point, one needs to ask oneself, having contemplated, for example, the situations described in the animal kingdom, because this is something one can see for oneself, and therefore contemplating those situations may have some impact in terms of a person wanting to improve, not inflicting suffering upon others, such as the different types of suffering just described. And having understood that evil deeds would be what causes my rebirth in any of these three lower existences, I would be trapped myself in those circumstances. So ask yourself the question, how would I feel in that situation? What would my life be like, an animal in any of the circumstances just described? And then ask yourself, would I be able to endure that kind of suffering? Thing is, there is no choice, as we saw on the part of the animals. They are just subjected to the suffering in question. So one really has to get to grips with this and ask oneself, would I be able to handle this? Is this what I want? Now, if one comes to the conclusion that this is not what I want for myself, then if one at all costs want to avoid that type of rebirth, then one needs to consider the following, namely, for that to happen, namely avoiding a rebirth like that, I need to improve in terms of words, thoughts and deeds, And that brings us to the worldly mindset, which is one ruled by the so-called three mental poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. And because of those afflictive, obscuring states, one enacts the kind of evil deeds that would propel one into a rebirth like the ones just described, a rebirth like that. So in order for that to not happen, one needs to work with one's mindset so that the presence of the three mental poisons decreases, and therefore one does not enact evil deeds that would propel one into an unfortunate rebirth, like in the examples just given, any of the examples just given. Now, as was said, an individual has the capacity for change. And if the individual is of the industrious type, as it were, someone able to persevere in his efforts, then avoiding an unfortunate rebirth in any of the three lower existences can be avoided. Now, the person with his aim needs to make up his mind. And when one uses the phrase to make up one's mind, it's a matter of having taken a decision which one doesn't waver from. It's not about going back and forth between, oh, I need to do this and that in order to avoid an unfortunate rebirth. And then in the meantime, one relaxes a bit and then, oh no, I have to. It's about making up your mind definitively so that you're able to persist in your efforts. Without pledging to do this, one simply isn't persistent in one's efforts. A person who properly takes refuge in the three jewels, the way of doing that properly, one perspective rather of doing that properly was described earlier. There are other perspectives. So properly taking refuge in the three jewels and then committing to not enacting any of the 10 non-virtuous actions and making up one's mind as to this, meaning keeping that commitment to not engage in any of the 10 non-virtuous actions, that secures a more fortunate rebirth in any of the higher existences. However, that pledge has to be firm, not subject to change. There shouldn't be lapses in terms of one's efforts.
Yeah.
And that results in a more fortunate rebirth, that as either a human being or a so-called God.
That yetala nangbe lam kin dik yong de that ye chung ding lam rem de song.
Then we have the next verse, which relates to a practitioner of a middling capacity. So what was just explained is attainable by a person of a lower capacity. Now we will go on with what's attainable for someone of a middling capacity.
That is Chulaka Gubarbe. Oh, yeah. Sixum Dewa Saji Sebayin, Yuzum Shiki, Jigbe Chujin Yin, Nam Yang, Minjur Tarbe Kampung Cho, Dundunyerva Jasela Yin, Sonate.
And the text reads as follows: the happiness of the three worlds is like dew on a blade of grass, vanishing in an instant. Striving for the supreme state, liberation which never changes, is the practice of a bodhisattva.
That is Song Penna Sixum Sigete Sigbasum then Durkam Zukam Sumage comes and Tantan number Sanje Bege Song Searchire.
Now there is the mention of the three worlds here, sometimes also called the three realms. Well, a world or a realm, they are sort of synonyms. Now, in this context, the three worlds are or is a reference to the major segments of a so-called impure world system. Impure in that we're looking at a worldly world system, not one of enlightenment, as it were. And the three segments of it are the desire realm, the realm of form, and the realm of no form. So these are the three worlds: the desire realm, the realm of form, and the realm of no form.
Then do come now la pena that la me that la sopa do come the net la then
now, there is, to begin with, the desire realm, the lower of the three. Inhabited, it has sub-segments and is inhabited by both human beings and so-called gods. And the driving force, or rather in terms of the mindset of those who inhabit the desire realm, is that of desire. This is the predominant characteristic of the mindset of those who inhabit the desire realm, hence the name. And in terms of objects of desire and the character of the desire in this realm, well, if you look at desire in the context of all three worlds, the character or level or extent of desire is more coarse, more pronounced in the desire realm than in the realm of form or the realm of no form.
Daga nanshin ke zukham tang zungme tenzo yina dewa rakpa tila miki yo amare nang tingen sing shine ki tingen sing chila mingne shine ki tingen sing le shungwe shintu yongwe dewa tila konso
Shintu kare yang.
Xinjiang ke dewa la mingne cha de
Desire, in the context of the desire realm, takes on objects or refers to, or simply desire, objects of desire, evidently, external and internal, primarily external objects. Hence, the mindset of desire in the desire realm is categorized as a coarse type of desire, a very pronounced or coarse type of desire. There is desire as to the mindsets in the two higher worlds, the realm of form and the realm of no form as well. However, here the object of desire is an internal one, namely various states of well-being resulting from a focused mindset, a meditative mindset. Now, there are various levels of meditation and its focus as to desire in this context, and as to the various levels and sub-levels of the two higher worlds, the world of no form and the world of form. The type of meditative state at various levels is a state of great calm, where mental perturbations have been put to rest or have been pacified in consequence of a one-pointed focus on an object of meditation. And that produces or results in various levels of well-being referred to as both refined, or one could perhaps say more refined mindsets in consequence of this kind of training as to this particular type of meditation, in Tibetan called Shine, which would literally translate as calm abiding, or shamatha in Sanskrit. However, these are states that involve desire, namely desire for those states of well-being that result from this type of meditation.
Tindu siksam dewa chebar sikbasam je dewa te dewa rakpa yinaindra dewa chawa yinaindra sungyor sa si silbachin sai zemula chakbe chu pena nimadi sharan de lamsan jigro
now the author points out here that the happiness or the perceived happiness on behalf of those who inhabit these three worlds is like dew on a blade of grass, vanishing in an instant. We all know that dew drops vanish in an instant once the sun has risen in the morning. So whether we're looking at a coarse type of desire or a more subtle type of desire makes no difference. The happiness or the perceived happiness in connection with these various states of desire, coarse or subtle, are subject to change, are impermanent, and actually vanish in an instant, depending on your perspective, of course. The lifespans of the higher realms are very long in comparison to the lifespan of human beings. However, whether you take the phrase vanishing in an instant from the perspective of those in the higher realms or in the lower realms, in the desire realm, makes no difference. If you put all of it in the perspective of having taken rebirths since time immemorial, then a lifetime as a human being or a lifetime in the realm of no form or in the realm of form, its duration is comparable to that of an instant. So, therefore, what's really the point in striving for this kind of happiness? That's what the author implies here. Now, our perceptions as human beings are limited, and we're not aware of the length of the lifespans nor of the circumstances of those in the realm of form or in the realm of no form. However, we know very well our own realm, the desire realm, at least the segment of it inhabited by human beings. And so it should be quite clear to us that the happiness we from time to time experience in connection with objects of desire, the happiness, the duration of it is not more than an instant in the end. And is it worth it, really? Is that something worthwhile? One should ask oneself.
Mind training
Yeah.
Mind training
And so there is, as has been mentioned earlier a couple of times, a cycle of teachings called mind training, involving hundreds and hundreds of different methods. This is one of them. This kind of consideration and contemplation, putting things into their proper perspectives, such as what was just said. Is the pleasure I experience for a while because of possessing an object of desire, is it really worthwhile? And so on.
korwale tar sembe sami ke dewatan namyan jurgmare songte.
On the other hand, liberation beyond the world, that is not subject to change. Liberation never changes. Once liberation has been attained, liberation remains as it were.
대인도 자세 성주 선반 남지 타르바 돈도 예르게 마도 콜베 덴데 돈도 예르게 말해 송.
And that's why bodhisattvas strive for the supreme state, that of liberation. Because to them it's quite clear that anything else wouldn't be worthwhile, as it were.
pen ka she gong sho la pen korwa la tab chi pu sam na ta na yin the be lo ma de be sam sam ji song khen den de do de ten de ra ma re che bu sam lam ge ran ba chi ge ten de chi ro go go ya.
Meaning
de pen na thong bu korwa la tan de lo ba lo ji nga le me na nge sem ji yin korwa la tar tab khan de che go.
There are people who would say here, why should I strive for liberation? That's the goal in Theravada Buddhism. It's the mempas on the Shikiri Samne.
Yeah.
It's a lower state. It's not Buddha, the enlightened state. Well, how to phrase this? That's sort of putting the whole issue in a context where it doesn't belong. You have the three segments of the path, lower capacity, middling and higher. And one has to figure out where one is right now and adopt the methods of the level one belongs to. And any practitioner needs to go through all levels. You can't jump from 0 to level 3 and just skip out the two previous. It doesn't work that way. For example, if you want to become a doctor, you can't skip basic education and start out at university. You can't handle that. So you would never become a doctor if you did that. It's the same here. It's the same principle. A Buddhist practitioner, any Buddhist practitioner, needs to see the point in going beyond any kind of worldly existence and attain liberation. And then go on from there. That may not necessarily mean Zangpo di tarpa togore tene yang pa satop sempa sugi sachula sopala pogore sungi ore tam di semgi drotang drotang tangi
Yeah, Korwanda Dunga in Bachi Hamagona. Tene Tsang Yungmarawa.
You see, the point with this, whether one strives to attain liberation or not, or whether one from the beginning strives to attain Buddha, the enlightened state or not, that's not the point really. The point made is that even if you're a person who is of the persuasion of Mahayana Buddhism, where the final goal is that of Buddha, the enlightened state, you need to understand suffering in any worldly existence and the reasons for wanting to go beyond the world in the context of the part of the path to enlightenment which is about the goal of liberation, as well as in the context of a path where the final goal is Buddha, the enlightened state. Knowledge-wise, contemplation-wise, and the like, you can't just skip the viewpoints associated with the path to liberation, because those teachings and those viewpoints make very clear to you why you at all want to practice the Buddhist path, irregardless of what your final goal is. You can't just skip basic education and go start out at university in your medical studies. It's the same principle, as it were.
Lasso. Sunamdaye, Tamje Zagbani, Tamne Nebe, Janam Pamjet, Jeganaje, Balap Chubai, Sigbe, Solen, Drawai, Drawar.